Fantasy Formula One podcast. I am Paul. That's Ben. Thank you for joining our conversation. It is a conversation we would be having anyway.
Absolutely.
Feel free to hit us up on social medias at Fantasy Formula One Podcast or email us at info@fantasyformula1podcast.com. Today, right now, we are going to discuss chips. We have mentioned it a few times, and I have very strong opinions about how chips should be used.
And I'm coming in kind of blind on that. So
Yeah.
one of the things we talked about the other week, so we're 3.5 weeks into the season so far, and at different intervals we've talked about how you might find certain people at the top of the leaderboards with a massive or insane amount of points, and you said, hey, yeah, that's a thing. Don't worry about it because they use their, what was that chip?
Limitless.
Their limitless chip. So
yeah.
I kind of logged that in the back of my head. Then you've got your you've got a couple other ones that could either be considered more defensive, more like an insurance policy, and other ones that you're using solely to maximize points. And so I have all the questions, and you've got the experience there, and that's what makes this podcast work.
Really, truly does. Like, and there's a lot of stuff that in all aspects of life, but especially about Fantasy Formula One, where as soon as we do it enough, or I do it for a few years, then it's kind of like you just accept it as true. Like my wife, who is a high school, like she's pitched her whole life. And for her,
let's finish the thought real quick. Your wife is a high school coach. She's not a high schooler.
No, she's not a high schooler.
You drifted off there a little. So I wanted to make sure that for the listeners, everything is above board.
Everything is above board. And so she pitched all through high school, pitched all through college, and so when I asked her to teach me how to throw a softball.
Yeah.
And it was very much like, well, you throw it. Like the mechanics she learned so long ago. As soon as you've been doing it for years and years and decades, it's like, well, no, how do you teach how to turn a steering wheel? Right? Like, no, you grab it and you turn it. And as soon as you were trying to explain somebody how to turn a wheel and you're like, apply pressure here and do this, the wheels kind of fall off. So a lot of times when it comes to fantasy F1, as soon as like, so what about chips? It's like, well, yeah, I know all about chips. And it matters so much, but to somebody who's new, it's like, well, no, let's start at the very beginning.
Get that foundational
knowledge. Yeah, that's good. So, and I know off camera we were just discussing that you were having an issue bringing up your chips.
Absolutely. So, I like to operate primarily out of the Formula One app.
Absolutely.
And just because consolidated information, everything's right there. But problem I'm running into is looking at the app. When I select my chips, I don't know if you can see that. You can't because it's very bright.
Very blown out.
Okay, well, take my word for it. And again, most of you are listening anyway, so that's fine. Right now, all I can bring up if I'm using the app is the Limitless chip, the Wildcard chip, Final Fix, and Autopilot. But if I log in to the website using my Safari app, I have access to all 6 of them, which are Limitless, Wildcard, Final Fix, Autopilot, No Negative, and Extra DRS.
Gotcha.
So make sure. I don't know. I don't know why that is. We just came across that right now. But if you are managing your fantasy team, strongly consider using the website, not the app, because this is probably the second or third time we've run into some infrastructure issues, either using an iPad or an iPhone.
Yeah.
So
and the big thing, you're absolutely right that consider using the other app or anything, but also is as soon as there's an issue, as soon as something seems not right, as soon as you're like, wait a minute, how come I'm not able to, use my other chips? Well, go look at the website. Or if you don't see it on the website, go to the app. Like, kind of work around it. Don't just be like, well, I guess I don't have it, or I guess it's no good,
right?
Because that's not how it works.
So that being said, we got kind of the IT housekeeping out of the way. Let's go through these one by one. So Limitless, can you give me just a brief explanation of what that is, and when would be an ideal time to use your Limitless?
Absolutely. So Limitless allows you to, I want to get the official, here's the official language about what Limitless is. I'm running the soundboard while we do this, and I keep moving my head around, so it's, there we go. So the official language for what Limitless is a turbocharged wildcard. So we have the wildcard. Let's talk about wildcard, then we'll talk into what Limitless is. The wildcard chip lets you make unlimited numbers of changes to your team.
And that's how you take control of an interview. Hey, tell me about Limitless. Hey, I'd be glad to do that. I'm going to talk about Wildcard.
Well, and how about this? Because line 1 for Limitless it's a turbocharged Wildcard.
Okay, fair. So, okay, I'm with you.
So yeah, so with wildcard, you can make unlimited changes without getting that -10.
Okay.
And so with a wild card, whether it's offensive or defensive, you can use it for both. What the times you use this are when suddenly half your constructors stop doing well and a whole nother team starts doing better, right? When you're
Sure.
looking at like, man, I need to completely overhaul my team now because for some reason Ferrari's factory decided to stop working.
Sure.
Or for
Okay.
some reason, like with COVID, it was a thing, I imagine, because you're like, okay, suddenly 3 drivers are now under replacements. Now suddenly Red Bull is bringing up 2 drivers from F2 because both of their drivers decided to have appendicitis.
I see.
Right?
Yeah, and this is potentially taking place after you've already made your adjustments.
Exactly. After you've already made your adjustments, or there's some big change, or like last year when suddenly McLaren started doing really well.
Right?
Well, now you're like, oh my gosh, I need to now get McLaren constructor and both McLaren drivers on my team.
Yeah.
Well, that's you're going to take negative. The way this works, you're going to take -10 points right away if you've never done anything wrong. And if you've already moved around your team and you've used up your changes, well, now you're about to go into a weekend with -30 points. That's what you'll use your wild card.
Absolutely. Okay, cool.
So I personally for second half, save it for the second half of the season. Save it for when there's big shifts, when all the modifications are coming in, all the upgrades are coming in.
Gotcha.
And you're like, okay, it's time to make a really big move.
A fundamental shift of strategy.
Shift. I will use my wild card.
I see. Okay.
At that point.
Cool. Thank you.
Absolutely.
And so as an extension of that, Limitless does...
Yes. So what Limitless does is the official verbiage is it's a turbocharged wild card. Play this chip. Not only do you get the unlimited transfers that you'll get for Limitless, but you also have no cost cap for that race.
Okay, so this is a one
race,
That's the best of everything.
Exactly. So
I see.
Where wild card will change you permanently. What you don't have, you can move it around all you want, whatever. Limitless says, okay, for one race, you can move all you want to around before, but after that race, everything's going to revert back to the way it was.
Gotcha. So in my head, I'm kind of seeing that moment in the Matrix where Neo's like, guns. Lots of guns.
Exactly.
I'm so glad you knew that.
Oh, yeah.
I love that about you.
That was so
and all
good.
of a sudden, all the carts of guns show up.
Exactly.
And so, but again, it only works for the 1 week. You can choose whichever constructors you want. Choose whichever drivers you want.
Exactly.
And enjoy.
So
unless you picked Max Verstappen last week,
and that's where I was
DNF'd.
going to get into. So Limitless is generally considered, because you and I both have our military background. Limitless is considered an offensive chip.
Yeah.
You wouldn't use this like, you're not man, I'm in trouble, I really need to use Limitless. No, you can, but it'll only save you for that 1 week. So you use Limitless for the races that you're like, man, I think all the drivers are going to do really well. If you're like, man, like right now, Red Bull and Ferrari are all doing great.
Yeah.
I mean, but so you would go ahead and you would use this to get both Red Bull and Ferrari constructors and all 4 of their drivers on the same race on the same field.
Sure.
The issue with Limitless is on any given race, any one of our F1 teams have a quarter of the field, right? We have 5 drivers, there's 20 drivers total. So as soon as you use your Limitless chip and get all the 5 best drivers, if one person crashes out,
Oh yeah.
now suddenly you're in deep trouble,
Right.
right? So it's an offensive chip, but you should use it. General strategy is you use it again second half of the season. You use it once you have a track record and it's well established who the good drivers are. Then you use it on a sprint weekend.
Okay.
So because in a sprint weekend there's 30% more points.
More points to be had.
Yeah. So suddenly as soon as but there's also double the chance to get a DNF.
Sure. But say you're playing bold, right?
Yeah.
And you time it right. You go sprint weekend. You've waited till after all the free practices and before qualifying. Sorry.
Yeah, before qualifying.
And you're saying I'm going all in, guns blazing. I'm throwing my Limitless on there.
Yep.
And I'm ruining the interview format myself
That's
here,
fine.
so I'm going to put myself on report because now I want to talk about the 3X, the extra DRS.
Yes.
We should technically talk about what that is, but I have a follow-on question about potentially applying multiple chips at once. Can you do that?
You cannot.
Never mind. Okay.
As soon as you apply one chip, then that's it. You cannot unapply that chip. There is a little error in the software where as soon as you apply the chip, but you don't make any changes to your guys.
Yeah.
I mean, if you apply a chip, but you don't change your lineup and you hit backspace, it'll make it so you never saved.
Gotcha. It keeps you in theoretical mode until you hit confirm.
Until you hit confirm. So that's a way you can like, I didn't mean to do that, or I did it, I did it, but I didn't hit confirm. So whatever. Once you hit confirm, it's locked in.
Okay.
So you can backtrack at that point. But once you hit confirm and you locked in, you cannot undo a chip.
Got it. Okay, I'm with you, but the loophole doesn't allow you to magically somehow apply 2 chips. Okay,
it does not allow you to do 2.
Because my follow on would have been, if you have that 3x chip, which so that triples your triples the points of a driver or your entire team.
And that's a very interesting point. So let's talk about the 3x. So the 3x is like the 2x DRS boost. So we have DRS.
Yes.
Every week you have a DRS driver who gets twice the points.
Correct.
Then with the 3x chip, you get a driver that gets 3 times the points.
I see.
You cannot stack them on the same driver. So now you have 2 drivers, one getting double, one getting triple. Now, why is that important? Well, with a lot of the builds that I have right now, you have 2 strong constructors, you have 1 strong driver.
Yes.
Okay. So as soon as you go to use that 3x chip, if you're somebody like me, you could unless you rearrange your team, you're going to find yourself using your 2x chip on somebody like a Haas driver.
Interesting.
Which is suddenly, as soon as you use your 2x chip on somebody who's only going to get you 10 points, congratulations, you use your 3x chip, and maybe Max Verstappen, instead of getting you 50, gets you 150.
Right.
But you're missing out. You could go ahead, adjust your constructors, and adjust your lineup if you know what you're doing going into it. Now suddenly you have Max Verstappen and Carlos Sainz. Carlos Sainz is 2x, Max Verstappen's 3x. But you have to take a hit on the constructors. You have to move a constructor out.
Yep.
Does that make sense?
Yes. And why wouldn't do that?
You wouldn't do that normally, but
when you have that chip available.
As soon as you go to use your 3x chip, like right now, let's say the philosophy I've been preaching is you need to have Red Bull and Ferrari as your constructors.
Yes.
And then you get one of the Red Bull drivers, one of the Ferrari drivers as your primary, your 2x driver, and then you fill in the rest of the ranks with Haas and Williams or somebody who's not
what you see being your best performer or your lowest liability.
Exactly. You want a low liability everybody else, but you're leaning on that 1 2x driver and you're leaning on your 2 strong constructors. At least that's right now the way the season looks like it's panning out.
Yep.
But when you go to use your 3x, you have to get rid of one of those constructors and get another strong driver up there.
I see.
See what I'm saying?
Yep.
So what you would do is, again, this is an example. I'm not telling you to do it, but let's say there's a sprint weekend coming in and Red Bull's been doing strong and Ferrari's all been doing strong, right?
Yeah.
Well, then what do? You get rid of the Red Bull constructor and you have both Ferrari drivers. And then you have your Aston Martin or McLaren. Yeah, or maybe not McLaren because they're more expensive. But then you get a good as constructor as possible.
Sure. But
you have 2 of your drivers that are on a hot streak, and then you 2x and you 3x them.
Yeah.
Because as soon as you double, if let's say Ferrari gets you, Ferrari's going to get you 70 points and Red Bull's going to get you 90 in a weekend. Well, as soon as you get both of the Ferrari drivers who are both going to get you 45 points or 40 points, one's going to get you 120, one's going to get you 80. So you're still barely going to come out ahead, assuming everything works out.
Yeah.
But what you don't want to do is go for your Ferrari constructor and then suddenly, as soon as you don't change it and you use your 3x for your main driver and you move that 2x to somebody like, I don't know, Alex Albon, well, now there's a much higher likelihood that somebody like Alex Albon or a Haas driver is going to DNF than there is Sergio Perez going to DNF.
Sure.
Just because as soon as you're finishing in the back 10, you're much more willing to take a DNF because you're not in the points anyway than if you're a Red Bull or a Ferrari who's finishing, who's starting on the pole. You're going to try and stay in the fight a little bit longer.
I see.
So if you use that 2x for like a Haas driver, you might end up taking negative 40 points when they DNF.
Yeah.
As opposed to, you might want to take a little bit of your for sure points away by getting rid of one of your strong constructors, but you use really 2 strong drivers. So that way, then we finish P1, P2.
Now, we're talking about making that switch to 2 strong drivers and then doubling down on them by going 3x and 2x.
Correct.
So say that week I go Sainz, Leclerc, and hang on to Ferrari as my one good constructor, right?
Yeah.
Do my 2x and then my 3x chip points apply to that constructor as well, or no?
Ooh, I don't think so. I think the constructor just gets the sum total of
the true points.
True points.
Okay.
And let me double check that though while we're talking. I'm gonna see. I'm gonna do it. Let me duplicate. I'm gonna try and do it without getting any dead air time, because I don't think that is the way it works. Because the chips like that are for the drivers, not the constructors.
Okay.
But I'm going to double check rules. Where's my manage my team? Because so on all the, let me go on my phone here. So if you look, here will be the litmus test. Let's go to last week's race, and I'm going to completed last week's race round March 24. So as soon as you use like the no negative chip, which we'll get to, that is across your entire board. That is, you will not take any negative points for your constructor or your driver.
Gotcha.
As soon as you take the 3X chip, then that is just for the driver. And so last week, I had Sergio Perez with my standard 2X, and he got 44 points. When I go down to Red Bull Racing and how they did for me, they took the 10 points for race position, 18 points for qualifying, negative 20 for not classified. The way the points broke out with everything else, Red Bull got 32 points last week. So no, it does not take into account the DRS.
Okay, well, hey, thanks for double checking on that for me.
I just want to make sure that was how. Yeah.
And then you hit on, so we can move to the next one here. Okay. You hit on the no negative.
Yes.
And that sounds like it's pretty self-explanatory.
Yes, purely defensive though.
Okay.
And this is something very, very important. So I used the no negative chip for one of my teams last week because Carlos Sainz was such a question mark for me.
Gotcha.
And I had him back on the team. I had him as my driver. I had him as my lead driver, my 2X driver. And I'm like, you know what? If after qualifying, this guy's like, no, I can't race. If they do like a Williams where like, hey, it's too close, we don't have enough time, because as soon as you qualify and your driver's out, you can't get a new driver in, I don't think. So I was like, man, just in case I'm wrong, I want to make sure that if all my other teams get hit, everybody would get hit really hard if Ferrari started taking these massive DNFs. So I went ahead and used my no negative for last week for then, just in case. And as it turns out, Red Bull took a DNF, and I had Red Bull as a constructor. So my team did not get hit with that negative 20 points.
Oh, nice. Okay, great.
So it worked out, but it was pure luck that it was the Max Verstappen thing. So for me, if you can go your entire week, if you can go to your entire season without using your no negative chip, do it. Don't use it just as something like willy-nilly. You do it when you're like, man, I'm nervous about this lineup. Man, in practice, Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez crash into each other in practice. Don't worry, their cars are going to be fine, they say. Don't worry, everything's back to normal. Maybe it's not. You don't want to get rid of Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez, because sure, they just bumped into each other maybe.
Sure.
And everything's going to be fine. But just in case they're not, we'll go ahead and put a no negative chip on our lead team. That way, in case they're like, and start of the race, they both of the cars conk out at the starting line.
Gotcha.
Well, okay. They crashed in practice. They weren't able to do anything during qualifying because their cars won't set up, and they finish P19, P20.
Gotcha.
So they take all these negative points. Well, you'll go ahead and no negative it. So the rest of your teams will get hit, but your lead team won't. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's how I would use the no negative.
Okay. Oh, so let me give you a follow-on here. Sure. And this is a in the spirit of, don't use the aerosol can in any manner other than intended.
Yeah.
If I wanted to misuse the no negative chip, could I make multiple transfers beyond my 2 allowables, go into the negative, and then hit my no negative chip, and then negate the penalty for those transfers?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, you can use your wild card, and you can use your limitless chip for that.
Gotcha.
But no negative, and let me find the exact nomenclature. No negative moves any team member scores as negative. You will limit your losses to 0 points for that driver constructor. New for this year, no negative is applied per scoring category, not just overall total for the driver constructor. You will still be deducted points for making more than the permitted number of free transfers.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So I know it's important. So as soon as you're like, and don't get me wrong, like last year, and this is one of the issues I had with me last year, is I was like, man, there's 3 races and there's 3 weeks in between. I want to move my constructors all around, move my drivers all around. So I'd use wild cards. So I could just move them all around all I wanted. Well, that's not really a good idea. And when it comes to this no negative, it's purely used as soon as you're like, man, this is really weird. As soon as you use up your free transfers and you're like, all right, I have to move people around. I either need to, be in a questionable situation, or I need to, take negative points for free transfers. Well, then you can use the no negative chip, and the worst, you can get 0 for anything.
Yeah.
So you can still use it in conjunction if you're like, man, here we go. But no, as soon as you take negative 40 points because you decided, like me, to, this happened once, you're like, oh, I'm not going to hit save. Well, no, I did hit save. And then suddenly you go negative 40 points.
Gotcha.
And you're like, crap. Well, the wild card is to erase those debts. So I'll go ahead and apply the wild card chip, or I'll apply the limitless chip when I wasn't planning on it, and it'll erase that negative 40 points because I goofed up. Does that make sense?
Yep. So ultimately, if you're going into the week and you have who you want, you have your planned drivers, but something feels a little funky town.
Yep.
This is the security blanket.
It is okay to use the no negative, and if you don't use it at all, save it for the last race of the year.
There you go.
Because, and here's the reason why it's smart. The last race of the year, no one cares. The last race of the year, for the last 4 years, the championships.
Oh, they're all going for broke.
They're all going for broke, so they're all going to risk that DNF. Or as soon as I'm driving and I know that I have no chance in getting the next points constructor ahead of me, right? For the drivers' championship or the constructors' championship, I won't succeed, and I didn't do a very good qualifying. Then something goes wrong with the car, well, I'll just DNF it and start thinking about next season.
Sure.
So, with the no negative, save it for the end and just use it at the last race.
Can I take a wild pivot for just a moment?
Absolutely.
You mentioned something talking about driver mentality and the it's the end of the season. Let's leave it all on the track. That really played such an interesting factor. If we go back to last week's race and the discussion or the decision of Williams' principal to keep Albon as the driver and remove Logan Sargent. We talked about that a little bit last week, but there was a really good write up on the F1 site by I'm going to butcher his name, Jolyon Palmer, I think.
Yeah, Julian Palmer. It's pronounced Julian.
Okay, it's spelled Jolyon. That's so I might be stupid, but I have a logic to my stupidity. So sorry, Julian. I'll do better next time. But saying, why was it the wrong call? To not let Logan Sargent drive? Because ultimately we can all Monday morning quarterback, and I can see the logic of the decision to say, okay, well, Albon's your more reliable driver historically. But what was so interesting is fundamentally, once you're down to one Williams car, and you've already got Albon who has crashed. Everyone had trouble during that turn. So just to acknowledge, it was several people had close calls, but he was the only one to go through a crash. When you are now the sole driver after having kind of made that gaffe, your mentality as a driver is going to be so much more conservative, and multiple other drivers overtook him because he had to drive more safely. They only have the one car. And so he's not gonna go for broke. He's not gonna take risks because look what happened during practice. Or was it qualifying? I'm sorry. It was practice. So if you have a guy who's gone through a crash during practice, you've only got one car. And now you've got the added pressure of I took the car from my teammate. That had a palpable, noticeable effect on his driving, and the other racers picked up on that and took advantage of it. And as a result, Albon finished, I think, P11. Now, if he had scored any points at all, it would have been the right call.
It would have been the absolute right
but
call.
This is it was a much more eloquently crafted analysis of why it turned out to be the wrong call.
And like everything in this world, especially with Fantasy F1, right? Everybody who used Limitless last week, they're like, man, I'm using Limitless. I got 2 Ferrari drivers. I got 2 Red Bull drivers. Everything's looking great. And what happened? Like Max Verstappen took a DNF, and now suddenly that Limitless cost you a lot of points. But and I have my whole thing about the Alex Albon thing. And I understand, like in the press releases and stuff, they were like, no, this is not emotional. This is strictly business.
Sure.
That is, especially maybe I'm just too big of a millennial, right? But you can't, this isn't, 1950 anymore. As soon as you say this is just business. All right, you can't take the emotion out of it, because what's the emotional state of your drivers?
Oh, yeah.
Right now, you did a strong telegraph to Sargent, our countryman Logan
Yeah.
Sargent, that they don't have faith in him, and you put so much pressure on Alex Albon to not ball up the second car in a weekend
Mm-hmm.
that everything you just said.
Yeah.
So you can't take the human out of that. And in the end, hey man, it's you and me racing. You crack up your car, I get my car. Done.
Well, and so that'll be very interesting when we get to the end of the season.
Yeah.
If Logan Sargent heats up and shows a lot of potential,
Yep.
and there's a seat that opens up elsewhere, there better not be anything from Williams saying, well, we were a little disappointed. We thought there would have been a lot more team loyalty. It's like,
Yeah.
no, man.
No, man, there's no team
It's a
loyalty
business
now.
decision.
Yep, it's absolutely. And Williams just showed their hand that it's not a team loyalty now, because where's that loyalty towards him?
Sure.
He was doing just fine.
And again, ultimately, I don't bear any ill will towards Williams,
No.
because they took a calculated risk, and even a calculated risk bears the opportunity to lose, and
No,
they did.
sure.
So
So
anyway, I'm sorry. Back to chips.
back to the chips. So what do we have left?
So we've
You're
still
you're
got
at the list, yeah.
final fix.
Final fix. So this is one you hope you never, ever, 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 ever have to use ever.
Okay.
If you get through the entire season without using Final Fix, that is just fine. So what Final Fix does is it allows you to change a driver or a constructor after qualifying.
Okay.
So you would use this if Max Verstappen's driving, and because as soon as you DNF, if you don't put a time up in the first round of qualifying, you get -5 points. As soon as you put a time up in Q1, but you do not do Q2 or Q3, that doesn't matter.
Sure.
Right? So the scenario you would use this for is that Ben is driving. He did fine in Q1. In Q2, he puts it in the wall. And now Ben is just fine, but the doctors are like, there's no way you're racing.
Right.
Or you're Williams, and you're like, hey, or something like that. We're like, hey, we don't have another car for you, Ben. Sorry.
Yeah.
And now suddenly my 2X driver, because that's how much faith I have in you, is now not racing. Or you're in the hospital just fine, but they're keeping you for observation, and
sure.
now you're not racing.
Yeah.
So now I'm going to basically waste my 2X chip. So what you do now is you use your Final Fix to play that chip and be able to get a new driver in.
I see.
To be able to
Okay.
swap that out. You still get all the negative points you had going in.
Yeah.
So as soon as you crash in Q1, or you don't put up a time in Q1 and you get -5 points, you'll still carry that -5 points over. But you use it if you're going to either have a void where you shouldn't have it, or something changes and you want to make that quick switch in between qualifying and the race.
Gotcha. So strictly defensive. This
Strictly
is crisis management.
This is crisis management.
Okay.
And because of that, as soon as you have somebody like Logan Sargent, right?
Yeah.
How suddenly he was out. Well, I didn't use my last change chip. I didn't use a wild card for that.
Yeah.
For that specifically, because it's fine. We can go without Logan Sargent. I'll have that void, right?
Yeah.
As soon as he crashes in Q2 and he's not going to be able to race, fine. You just take the 0 for him and just roll with it. It's you use the last chance when there's a major thing that's going on that will screw you unless you change it.
I'm with
That's
you.
when you use the limit.
Okay.
The last chance.
Or if it's like a negligence-based catastrophe, that like if you're hot on Ollie Behrman,
Yeah.
and you picked him up, put him on your roster,
good point.
and then you find out, oh shoot, Sainz is
Sainz
is back
doing
in.
it.
Dang it.
Exactly. But it's after qualifying.
Yeah.
You can use that.
You can
last
you can
chance.
still
Yeah.
switch back out.
Exactly.
Got it. Okay.
Yep.
Okay, cool. No, that makes a lot of sense. It's kind of like The Office. It's like, explain it to me as if I were 8. Okay, explain it to me as if I was 5.
Exactly.
Dude, you getting the references makes me feel good.
Oh, I love The Office, man. That's
Yeah.
so funny.
Last one is autopilot. What is that?
Yes. So what autopilot does is it gives your 2X DRS boost to whoever the best driver is for it. So, for example, and this was really important for the teams who were racing like a Sergio Perez, a Lando Norris Sergio Perez build last year, where it was neck and neck as to who would actually do better. As soon as you have both, as soon as you have Max Verstappen and like if you have Max Verstappen and Carlos Sainz on the same race, on your same team, well, which one will do better? We expect,
Sure.
yeah, but you never know, right? As soon as Max Verstappen blows his engine, well, now you're going to take that negative 40 points. Max Verstappen didn't blow his engine; he had a brake issue, but no, you know what I'm saying. So what this autopilot does is whoever would have gotten you the best points throughout the season,
Yeah.
they automatically apply that 2x to that driver. So you still mark whichever driver you want 2x, but you apply the autopilot chip, and then it doesn't matter. It overrides what you want if that's not in your best interest. So if you have a 2x driver and they crash out, that 2x automatically goes to the next better driver.
Gotcha.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And this is this a offensive or defensive chip?
I'd call it a defensive.
I would call it a defensive as well. So
okay, so
I think it depends.
I think there are arguments for both, just because if you have, it's an insurance chip.
It's an insurance chip, and like for example, Max Verstappen in Singapore, Red Bull from last year does really bad in Singapore.
Yeah.
So you would go ahead if you have two drivers that are you want to keep it with Max Verstappen, but just in case,
sure,
then you could go ahead and use the autopilot chip. That is one of the lower threat chips because it's designed to make it so your team kind of does exactly what it's supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
And if for some reason you think your 2x driver isn't up to the task, then you should change that for free before the weekend starts.
Yeah.
But if you're like, man, like for example, if you're doing the heavy Ferrari build, well, who's going to do better, Leclerc or Sainz? It could go either way. And especially if it's one of their big tracks, you're like, man, I have both of them on there. Not sure which one I want. I will have both two equal drivers with the autopilot chip, and let fate decide.
Yep.
Then as soon as one does really well or one doesn't, it'll bonus you.
So in stock terms, your 3x would be your high risk, high yield investment.
Yes.
This chip is more of your, mutual funds, just spread it around a little bit, make sure that, nothing's hurting too much. And at the end of the day, you'll come out a little bit ahead of where you were before.
Exactly.
So,
and you should. And at least that's how I would use it. Some people might want to think differently about how they use their autopilot chip. For me, it's if you've done your job right, you shouldn't need it.
Yeah.
If there's a situation where you're like, okay, it could go either way, then I'll go ahead and use the autopilot. But again, it's one of those ones that you can wait till the end of the season.
It's mostly a convenience.
It
could end up saving your butt.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Cool. All right. Well, hey, thanks for the walkthrough on that. Because again,
Absolutely.
I know we've talked about it before, but given all there is to absorb when you're walking into this cold, that this is one of those, I took the information in and immediately ejected it in favor of something else.
Yep.
So thank you.
Absolutely. and I will drive home the point that you alluded to at the beginning. When you look at the leaderboard of the 2 million teams that we have in Fantasy F1 globally, the leaders right now are the people who they came in off the bench. You weren't allowed to use your wild card before the first race because there's no need to. You automatically have free changes before the start of the season. You weren't allowed to use your limitless one because they want you to actually have your team established. And if you use your limitless chip at the very beginning, there's no team to revert back to. So they didn't.
Oh, fair.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
So that's why you couldn't use both of those. And I think there was another one you couldn't use before the season started. I think it was like a no negative you couldn't use. I don't know. But regardless of that, right now when you look at the leaderboard, the leaders are the people who guessed right. Who did fine the first race, or you could use your 3x, who used their 3x for Max Verstappen in the first race.
Yep.
Then they used their limitless in the second race, or however that worked out. And then is this coming up on the third race? Last week was the third.
Last week was the third race.
See, and then the third race, the people used I forget what that, or they used their 3x for the Ferrari, right? So if you use limitless last week, you're in deep trouble because Max Verstappen, you throw all the stuff in there, Max Verstappen hurts you bad. Bad. But as soon as so when you look at, I say all that to say, I kind of got off track, but when you look at the leaderboard, if you click back through the weeks, they're the people who are using their chips.
I gotcha.
Right now.
Now, I'm going to pry a little bit. I know you like to keep your team a little close to the chest, which makes all the sense in the world, but I got to ask, have you used your 3X yet?
So I have not, and I have no problem, like now that I have the other few weeks in, I'll talk to you about what I've used and what I haven't. So I have not used my 3X chip.
Okay.
I have not used my limitless chip because for me, I want to know that everything's all the kinks are kind of worked out over the first few. Because I want to know who the good drivers are and who the bad drivers are, and stuff like that.
Gotcha.
And I have notoriously I have a lack of faith in Ferrari just because they burned me so bad last year.
I see.
So they're still prospect, not suspect for me. But I'm like, a little slow on that. So I haven't used my 3X, haven't used my Limitless. The only ones I did use is last week I used a no negative for my Carlos Sainz team.
Okay, sure, because again, he just had something pulled out of his body, and now he's back in an F1 car.
Exactly.
You never know what's going to
And I did use my wild card for one of my teams last week.
Okay.
But that was because it was with the whole Logan Sargent thing. And with all, anyway, so when I moved it around, I realized I was carrying a negative 20-point balance because I broke my cardinal rule, made a change right after the race.
Yeah.
And then I made another change. I'm like, well, what's the point of this wild card is to keep me from taking points and to keep me from taking negative points. And last year I lost my friend's league by 12.
Oh.
So, like, I went ahead and nope, this is what it's for. And I used the wild card and I zeroed that out.
Okay.
So those are the two I've used. Will I be using the 3X at some point? Yes.
I mean, you have to.
You have to, and I absolutely will. But I'm going to kind of wait for the right track and the right race to do it. And usually I look for those after the second half of the season. But we'll see how well not qualifying, but how practice does and stuff coming up in Japan.
Sure. Okay. Hey, well, thank you for that.
Absolutely. So that covers our chips,
Yes,
and then the next episode we will be discussing racetracks and things like that.
Yes.
Do you have any parting shots or saved rounds?
No, just a little bit of housekeeping. If you have stumbled upon us and you're enjoying the podcast, please, on whatever platform you listen to us on, please leave us a review, an honest review. It doesn't, we'd love 5 stars, but ultimately, give us what you're going to give us because that gives us additional visibility one way or another. So, we'd love that. Thank you so much.
And also, if you have suggestions, like, hey, you have questions or suggestions or things we can do better, do differently, or information you want to hear, we'll gladly take those comments as well.
Paul, I don't know how you can improve on perfection.
All right, cheers.